super desperate. So it's great to be here. Thanks, Mike, and it's great to be here in Gladstone a little bit. Boy, this is a tough topic to talk about. Bob Jensen is the expert. He's sitting right over there. So he can set me straight every time I screw up on this talk, because he knows the shape of Maplewood better than I do. So we're going to go all the way back to the late 1980s. Okay? This is my favorite map of Maplewood. This is one of those fancy maps. You could have got these free at Party Time Liquor. He was giving them away. Former council member. Oh, boy, why am I drawing a blank? Who is it? Mark Coppin. Yes, Mark Coppin. Anyway, I love this map because you can't figure out anything the shape of Maplewood at all in this map at all. And what's fun is you look at it and see how many things are still here and what's gone. You got Richards Market, gone. Haney Rental still there. Burger King is gone.
Gem Store probably gone.
Huh?
Gem Store is gone.
This is 1989. Gem Store, long gone. But it's kind of a fun map. I'll leave it up here. People can take a look at it later. So I'm going to go back further than that. Obviously, we're going to talk public land survey. Doesn't that sound like fun? I could talk an hour on the public land survey. Yeah, no, not that long. But in my office, we have 100 of these maps that we used to use all the time. What this is, here, every table gets one. Every table gets a free map. And if you want another one, you can surely get more of these. You're really going to dive deep into maps here. We're diving deep. These are 50 years old, from 1970. Hasn't changed a whole lot. Although some of these townships are now cities. Anybody here live in Grant? Hey, that used to be a township, now a city. Yeah, it will be a test. So, look at this. I don't know how much information you can show on one map.
What year was this?
This is 1970. Okay, everybody going? Good. Okay. So you might need a magnifying glass to read everything on here, but take my word for it, there's over 1,700 townships on this map. So in 1858, when Minnesota became a state, people quickly realized you have to kind of have some level of government. What's the number one problem people have universally in the state? All the way back to 1858, what's the number one thing on their agenda? Roads. Who said it? Roads, yes. So, probably the main reason why you had townships is the number one reason is got to keep the roads clear. Farmers demanded clear roads. The rest of the time they want you to leave them alone. But they had to have free, clear roads. So these townships were created in 1858, not all at once. Here in Ramsey County, one of the first, by about May 11th, 1858, was when the townships were made here. And if you look at the map very carefully up on the Iron Range, those aren't straight lines. They had problems with the iron ore in the ground with their compass, and they didn't realize they're off. So they're not perfect rectangles. But if you look at them, most of them are perfect rectangles. So looking a little closer to Ramsey County, smallest county, only had 6 townships. And probably barely could see it on there, but it pretty much by 1970, it was all mostly cities. But White Bear Township still exists. So 1858, divide up Ramsey County in these townships. You got New Canada, we're in right here, New Canada. Rose Township, named after Isaac Rose. Mounds View because of the hills. White Bear because of the legendary white bear of White Bear Lake. And then, you can't see it on here, but McLean Township was on the side here, named after Nathaniel McLean. And Reserve Township, right around here, was because of the Fort Snelling. So right away you realize there's a big old city taking up some of the townships. So that's St. Paul, and St. Paul was a player right at the start. And each township, to divide it up further, is divided up into sections. So every township's 6 by 6 miles. So like your town of Grant is probably 6 by 6 miles, I'm guessing. Not anymore. Not anymore. The city of Grant, village of Grant, city. So, like Maplewood wasn't a city at first; it was a village. Village of Maplewood. They were very strong about that. Village of Maplewood. So we have our townships, and they're divided up into sections. Each section is 1 mile, or how many acres, Bill? You think? 640. Spoken like a true farmer. 640 acres. So we are in, actually, the old New Canada Township, section 15. So I'll pass this around. Everybody can take a look at the close-up. Okay, so let's see, what else do I got? All right, so every township, not all of them, but they usually had one of these. The town hall, right? So does anybody know, is this town hall still around? The old New Canada Town Hall. Yes. Yes, it's still there. You would never recognize it.
Where is it?
It's on Frost Avenue. It became the Gladstone Catering. And it is in pretty rough shape. Yeah, very rough shape. This is what it looked like, though, in 1900, early 1900s. It actually was located on the north shore of Lake Phelan, and one winter they picked it up and moved it. And believe it or not, very difficult to get voters to approve to build a building. There's a shock, right? Not easy to do. They never were able to build a better town hall than this. So despite all the changes over time with New Canada, this was the town hall up to the end. So one thing about New Canada, let's see, is, all right, here we go. New Canada, right? So we got New Canada, and here's St. Paul lurking just to the south. So what happened over time is St. Paul got bigger, began to annex parts of New Canada and that other township I mentioned, McLean. So they did it one section at a time, so kind of nibbling away at it, 1 mile at a time. So eventually, there wasn't enough of McLean Township left to really run a township government. So you needed, like 3 supervisors per township, and you needed the support of the people. You needed to have enough, they called them mills, to the taxes, to do the roads and everything. So it was decided to merge what was left of McLean Township into New Canada. And I wish I had a good map of that. Well, here, this is a better map. So here's Maplewood today. It kind of tells. So McLean is the long, skinny thing. So not all of it. Part of it was New Canada. So this big blank space is St. Paul. So what happened was, so that explains a good chunk of what happened to the southern part of New Canada and a good chunk of McLean. Now there's more to the story than that. Washington County took a little McLean, Dakota County took a little McLean, everybody wanted a chunk of McLean Township. But there's also some other mysteries on this map. It's got chunks taken out of it. Here's one of them, this one right here. So anybody can tell me what that rectangular shape is? North St. Paul. So in 1887, North St. Paul decided to incorporate and form its own city. So that's always a tricky thing with a township. So where do you think most of the movers and shakers were in 1887? Other than Gladstone, North St. Paul. And when they broke away in 1887, they still wanted to run the township. And technically speaking, that's a big no-no. Once you incorporate, you're something else. So it's always a bit of a scramble with the remaining township. Is now what do you do? Then you lose all those people. You lose the leaders. And so that kind of served as a template for the future. They kind of had a lesson to learn there. Now, if you notice, there's a lot more nuance than that. Notice this far northern part of Silver Lake is not North St. Paul, it's Maplewood. Yes. So there were some minor land swaps even after the incorporation of St. Paul. And maybe that'll be a future talk, is minor land changes in Maplewood and North St. Paul. Okay, what other city, there's another chunk missing over here. What would that be? Little Canada. Okay, 1953. So, New Canada Township up to 1953 is a pretty sleepy place. North of St. Paul, mostly farmers, the Bruin Trups. Oh, we can rattle them all off. Oh gosh. What do we got? Raditz. Name some more. Coleman. Cook. Fitch. So anyway, all the farmers were kind of running the show. So the farmers were on the board, on the town board. Was Bill or your grandpa on the town board? No, school board, right?
My grandfather was on a school board.
School board. But those are the ones that kind of made the decision. So what do you think happened after World War II? Suddenly all the GIs come back, right? And they want homes. And right here, this is where it happened. Around Wakefield Lake, a new parish formed, Presentation, Cross Lutheran Church, Gladstone Baptist. So we had these churches, and all these homes were built, early 1950s. So here we got a dilemma. So what do you think the people that had all these homes on Dieter Street, on Hazelwood, on Barclay, on Birmingham, on Manton, on Ide, on Golden Place, Prosperity, hundreds of homes. Kids. What do we, okay, this leads to an interesting question. Schools? Well, schools are coming. They slowly evolve too. So, no sewer, no water. So, the first thing that happened was, what do you do with your overflowing septic tank in 1953? Yeah, you pump it into the street. Why not? So, how do you think that went with the next door neighbors? Not well. Not well at all. So, big problems with sewage. Water would come later. So, everybody's got a septic tank, and if you live in this neighborhood, they're still there, by the way. In all those houses, in the backyard, there's still a septic tank. That's sometimes a surface once in a while. So anyway, that's going on here. So the township supervisors at the time, so a township runs 3 supervisors. They only have part-time help. They have a health inspector, whose job is getting a lot more busier, by the way. A constable, who else? Building inspector. So you have a few part-time workers. So, let's see. He lived on Prosperity. Somebody might have to help me with his name. He was on the town board and then became a council member.
O'Mara?
Ed O'Mara. Thank you, Steve. Ed O'Mara. So he said, okay, we gotta change some stuff here. We got septic tanks running all over the place. Let's get some sewer and water and do some more services. So discussion began with St. Paul, and then something else at the same time happened in the early 1950s. That was a big deal. Can anybody guess what happened?
Didn't St. Paul want it?
They wanted something.
They wanted
3M.
3M. They wanted
Yes.
3M, yeah.
3M decided to move their campus, or they were planning to move their campus in what was the north end of McLean, I think, right? North end of McLean Township. So St. Paul saw the writing on the wall, and those 3M, they're going to leave St. Paul. And they want the 3M. So, talks began about annexing part of old McLean Township, which is now New Canada, into St. Paul. And by the way, we'll trade you for sewer and water. And the people in New Canada are like, well, if we lose 3M, there goes our tax base. So there's rumblings of incorporation around here. Little Canada, 1953, wanted none of it. They said, oh, no. You guys down there in Wakefield want septic. We don't want any sewer and water up here. We're still farming. And they said, we're going to break away. And they did. 1953, Little Canada incorporated, formed a city. Now they learned some lessons from the 1887 experiment. This time they shared and divvied up the funds equally between the new city and the New Canada. Of course, you have to get new supervisors and new things. Now the town hall was already moved and right about here. So by the 1950s, there was no way in their annual meetings they fit in this little town hall. You guys can pass this around too. So they had the meetings at the Gladstone School. So hundreds of people attended. So the septic question didn't really go away. So what they did was, in 1957, decided to vote to incorporate. Now there were some attempts to incorporate other parts. This is Midvale that tried to incorporate, what year was this? 1947, and it failed. Kind of on the same lines of, there wasn't enough support to form a city. It's probably good for Maplewood they didn't form a city.
Pete,
Yes,
does everybody know where
Midvale.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there's only one thing left that's called Midvale, I think, and that's the old grocery center.
Nolan's.
Nolan's. Is that still there?
Yeah.
Nolan's still there? Okay. So that's still there. That was Midvale. And they had some boosters down there. They actually had their own column in the old Maplewood, or not Maplewood, it was the Ramsey County Review newspaper. So they tried, it didn't work. But 10 years after that, they did it again. This time all of New Canada. And it was approved by a 5-to-1 margin. So half the voters, eligible voters, turned out. So it was 2,404 and 567 against. So now they're on the same footing as St. Paul on a city-by-city basis. Now it didn't solve the problem with sewer and water right away. It took many years to solve that problem. And eventually even Little Canada hooked up to it. So, but it's very interesting that because of all this, Maplewood has St. Paul water. Little Canada has St. Paul water. What does North St. Paul have?
Their own water.
Their own well water. So it's always kind of interesting who has city water and who has well water still. And then north of this line, it's all well water. White Bear, Van Heights, out to the east, Oakdale has wells, Woodbury has wells. That has its own issues. But otherwise, it took a long time, and I don't even know, Mike, in your area, people still weren't all hooked up yet. I don't think. No. There was an area close to Little Canada, I think it was Payne Avenue, that still didn't have city water yet. Yeah, so it took a long time to do it. So, 1957, Maplewood is incorporated and looks about the same, actually about the same as it does today. And, we're still a good city ever since. So, if anybody got any questions, I mean, there's a lot more deep we could go into land surveying, but I wasn't gonna go that far into it. But I still use, in my day work at the climate office, I still use township range and section all the time. If you have anybody here who's a rain gauge reader, you're entered in my system, township range and section. So, out in the rural areas, they use a lot.
You said it so fast. Was it 3 words?
Township, range, and section. So we're in Township 29, Range 22, Section 15. Yep. And there's a lot of history with the public land survey that I won't go deeper into it, but that's how you could find any of those numbers on this map. That's Township. Okay, Bob, question.
Pete, I think Bob Jensen probably can add a little bit.
Oh, yes.
Do you mind if he does?
He can add anything he wants. He wrote the book on the evolution of the townships, for sure.
And Bob can correct me a little bit. So, America, the whole three umbrellas, that's how Maplewood came about.
Yes.
That is exactly how Maplewood came about, because it was a battle of the city, and they did it overnight. And that's why they chose a couple names. Ed O'Meara came from New Jersey, I can't remember the town.
Yep, New Jersey.
But there was a Maplewood in New Jersey, so he came up with that name, he floated that out there, and then it stuck. But Ed said, basically, they did it like overnight, and they were fighting St. Paul, because St. Paul wanted to incorporate that mile wide, 7 mile long piece. And Maplewood town board approved it like overnight, and they came up with a name, and then they had to get it incorporated. And so it was a village, but really it was a battle over the sewer system. It was a battle over the sewer system. And St. Paul didn't want to pick up that, but Maplewood picked it up. Now, Bob can embellish.
Yeah, so what happened with that meeting that Bob's talking about is I think it was the athletic club, they invited the people of Maplewood and St. Paul, and they gave them their offer, 3M and sewer, and the city said, no, we're not going for that. So eventually it worked out, and I think it worked out for both cities in the long run. I think it's, we have the waterworks here in Maplewood, so, I mean, the water comes through here, so I'm glad we hooked up to it when we did. It is not easy to hook up to it anymore. So I don't know when the last city's been hooked up to St. Paul City water. Anybody? I don't know. Little Canada after Maplewood, but it's and here's the problem: is if you go farther on the edges of the city, the pipe gets smaller. So it's not like they could just hook up Woodbury to St. Paul water like that. It would be difficult. It's expensive. North St. Paul would be the best shot someday if they ever wanted to do it.
But, you know, I lived in North St. Paul for about 20 years in between Maplewood, and they have good water there.
Yeah,
Really good water. In fact, my mom lives in, I live in a house, they're off, Cairo D, near the old
Yeah.
store, Menards.
The Menards.
And, that's good water too.
Yeah, I mean, it's municipal water, it's not a private well, so you never know.
We had a well for many years.
A lot of people had private wells. Anybody still got one?
No.
No? Are they all gone? Oh, I knew people that still had private wells. Really? I suppose, yeah, they've all been capped, haven't they? I'm trying to think. Yeah. Some people just used them to water their lawn. I knew that in the Gladstone area.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, question.
I thought I heard sometime about this meeting, something about the streets or the roads,
Oh,
that they didn't, St. Paul didn't want to pay for, is that something else, was that something, someone mentioned that's one reason that they didn't want to, besides
well,
the water?
that'd be up to the people that live here about roads. I don't know much about, it's another expert, Bob, on the road evolution, but no, St. Paul wouldn't have dealt with anything with the roads unless it was. The other issue with St. Paul and Maplewood is the way they do their school districts. That was another hang-up because, if I remember right, St. Paul, you have to adhere to the incorporated boundaries. So if they had nibbled away at some of the township, they take away the school district. There's something with that. I don't know the details, but their school districts had a lot to do with it too. How would you deal with schools? Sandy.
Yeah, I believe my parents who lived down on Frank Street, down towards Phelan,
Shar?
Mike and Char, when there was a vote, I believe,
Yes.
whether they wanted sidewalks. And people out here decided, no, we don't want sidewalks because we're too rural, we want to keep that rural look.
Yeah.
Of course, they were pretty rural back then, so they could do it. But I believe there was a vote whether we wanted sidewalks or not
Okay.
sidewalks, and they said no.
Well, depending on Frost Avenue, you had the same thing. Yep. Bob?
I want to tell one story, and it deals with the volunteer fire department, because it also deals
Oh,
with
yes.
water.
Of course.
So, when we were in Canada Township, we didn't have our own volunteer fire department up to 1943. It was contracted either from North St. Paul or from the city of St. Paul. 1943, if you remember, was World War II, so a lot of the firefighters were off fighting. So St. Paul said, we can't support you anymore.
Yep.
But that wasn't the only story. St. Paul has fire hydrants. So all of their fire trucks are used to hooking up to a fire hydrant. New Canada Township had 14 hydrants along the canal. So there was no way of St. Paul getting water out to the township. So that was the second reason that they didn't want to come out to the township. There was also a third argument that St. Paul was well mapped out, so 4th Street, 5th Street, so on. The township didn't have a very good road system, so quite often the St. Paul Fire Department literally got lost fighting a fire out there.
I love it.
So in 1943, we were rural, very much farmers. Big city folks didn't want to come out here, so that was when the volunteer fire departments got started in Gladstone, East County Line, and later in Parkside. But it was about the early 1960s before we could hook up to water. The St. Paul Water Department said, we have only a little bit of water, we don't want to share it with you suburbs, we're going to keep it to ourselves. It was 1960 before they convinced at least Maplewood to look into it. I was going to say one more thing. You're talking about wells. When I researched this, Maplewood still 3 years ago had 118 private wells.
Okay.
From those early years of developing, you can imagine how many houses were built in the 1950s with private wells. I used to have a private well in White Bear Lake. I did not want to switch to the city water, so there's still 118. We're one of the few suburbs that has many private wells in the Twin Cities area.
Wow. Didn't know. They know. Is that mean? Are they around here or are they South Lake?
And they're scattered throughout the area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, didn't know that. One funny tidbit about, you mentioned Kennard having early water. Some people were not billed by that water and they didn't find out for many decades. So there's a few folks that got free water for many years. Yep. I don't know how they found out, but if they eventually did. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, it was fun.
Hey, let me step in only because, so water. So I finished up a career of 31 years working as a city administrator in 10 different cities in a county, and I served up in Hugo for the longest time. So my notoriety, if you YouTube Hugo tornado, I was there in
You're in the tornado.
2008. But I also worked across the freeway in Centerville. And the story about Centerville, and more importantly, Centerville Lake, is the St. Paul Regional Water people were so smart that many years ago with the right engineers. There is a pipe that comes from St. Paul, goes all the way underground, and if you look at Centerville Lake, there's a buoy out there. In the event that that aquifer would have dried out, they would have pumped water from Centerville Lake. Oh yeah, it's a true story. They were so smart. If you ever want to go on a field trip, go to the St. Paul Regional Water. They're undergoing a massive remodeling and addition on it. But it was fascinating that early in the early 1900s that they would have had the foresight to go, you know, if it dries up. And the only time it had been turned on, if those of you, and a lot of you have been around that long, was the drought of 1987. They actually turned the switch on. But someone goes there every single day, and they float the boat out there once a week to make sure that it all works. So anyway, that's another.
That's pretty, I didn't know that.
There you go.
They learned something new. Well, if anybody wants extra township maps,
One more question.
Oh, right here, Steve.
I got a trick question for you.
yes. It comes with a map now, Steve. Every time you ask a question, you get another map.
Is the current city of Maplewood made up of 2 previous townships or 3?
2. I think it's only 2.
No.
Oh, is there 3? Ooh, see, there's a tree, tricked me.
Because.
Oh, White Bear?
White Bear.
Yes,
North
White Bear,
County Road
yes.
8 between that
Got
and it's actually 3.
When did that happen, though? Maybe Bob knows. When did we grab some of White Bear? I remember
We
that.
went through 694.
Yeah, oh, when 694.
We traded, they got the north half, that's north of 694, we got the south half.
Okay. So it wasn't like an island? An island like on the other side of the interstate. Okay.
Although the White Bear Lake School District wasn't going to give up 1 square inch.
Oh, that's what I was gonna. My next question. Okay. All right. That's a good one. I like the trivia. Trivia's great. Yeah. Well, I'm glad I learned. I think I might have learned more today than I talked. So that's always a good thing. So, yep. Anybody, any more questions? Let me know. And, you know.
Questions for Pete, everybody?
Yeah, that's it. I know.
So I'm going to go out here and say, is this the sort of stuff that you want to hear about? Did you want to hear more of things like this? Yes. Good. And people say we're not that old of a city. We're not.